everyone, welcome back to my channel at Megan Abroad. So today I'm going to be talking about all my impressions of Mexico after traveling there for 6 months. What stood out to be the most? What are some of the stereotypes? What are some of the contradictions? What are some of the surprises? And in true Latin America fashion, you get to hear all the traffic going on behind me. The traffic is trafficking outside my door, and I'm going to try and soldier on and ignore it. Right now, I'm in a completely different country than when you last saw me, and I've also had many months of travel since then. So keep this in mind as I talk about my impressions of Mexico, that it's from my own personal experience and my own personal perspective. If you know me or if you don't, I'm Canadian, I grew up there, and I then spent some time in Europe for about 3 years. So I was living in Germany and traveling mostly in Europe. So this is actually my first time traveling in Latin America. I will also outline what I did in Mexico, where I was, because first thing you should know is Mexico is a huge country and very diverse. My impressions are just based on the places that I visited, but I have plenty more places that I want to visit in Mexico, and hopefully I have the chance to come back and do that. Let's get started. So how did I travel in Mexico? What did I do? Where did I go? I will start off with the beginning. So I landed in Oaxaca in the end of July of 2024. After spending some time in Oaxaca, I ended up living in a hostel there and volunteering at the hostel for a couple months. I was there in Oaxaca for 2 months, and then I met my current boyfriend, and we ended up traveling together to San Cristobal. I always get the emphasis wrong, which is more of a small town in the south of Mexico. It's in the southernmost state of Mexico called Chiapas. And then we spent another 2 months there. That was really relaxed vibe, very small town, but also like a vibrant arts and culture scene, I would say. Then we spent a couple weeks in a beach town that's in the state of Oaxaca, which is called Mazunte. And later on, we spent my final month in Mexico of my 6 months. I was in Mexico City, the capital. So that's an overview of where I've been. So I was able to see, I think, a good mix between a medium-sized city, a small town, a beach town, and then the capital, the biggest city. Yeah, let's jump into my impressions. So the very first thing that I want to talk about, very high on my priority list, is food. I would say before I came to Mexico, Mexican food ranks up at the top of my favorite foods if you categorize them by a specific culture or country. But I love spice. I love things with a lot of flavor. Mexican food has always been one of my favorites. So common fact is a lot of people think Mexican food is just tacos and nachos and burritos. And that's simply not the case. In fact, Oaxaca has the most amount of diversity, foods I've never been able to try in my life and weren't even able to try in other parts of the country. I'm talking like tlayudas, memelas, drinks like tejate. There's a fermented drink that I always forget about. It's made of fermented pineapple. Of course, there are tacos, and tacos are amazing, but they are also very different than what you might get in other countries. I remember in Germany, and even to some extent Canada, you have tacos that have all these different types of toppings, and you just get maybe like 1 or 2 or 3. But I was surprised to see that in a lot of places that were authentic tacos, it was just simply soft shell corn tortilla, a type of meat on there, and then you put your extra toppings, just like some lime, some onion, some cilantro, and whatever different types of salsas they have. And it's funny to me because obviously, or maybe not so obvious, I'm not sure, Tex-Mex is so different than Mexican food. And if you go down the Mexican aisle in, let's say, a Canadian grocery store, you will see like jar of salsa, which is just like basically chopped up tomatoes. But salsa in Mexico can be anything. I have had the most delicious types of salsas and so many different varieties. They have ones with completely unexpected ingredients, the ones where they char the vegetables first before blending it up, and always homemade, always fresh, and never from a jar. I think that is the best part about Mexican food. I freaking love sauce, and definitely the spice is there. Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. I feel like though my spice tolerance increased over my time in Mexico. Oaxaca was #1 for food, definitely in all the places I visited, although there were some highlights other places. But they also have a famous thing you just have to try called chapulines, which is basically like roasted grasshopper. And they roast it and they put salt and lime on it. But my impression, if you put chili and lime on anything, it's gonna taste good. For me, I would like have a couple with a beer and probably not more, but there are people who literally will snack on it. What else? Tamales, the hot chocolate is incredible. Coffee is incredible. This is my first time traveling to a country that has very prevalent street food culture, I would say. But I love the fact that you can get food at any time of day, very accessible, very great price. You can just see how food is really integrated into the culture. Especially in Oaxaca, I would say they have amazing street food. By the way, quesillo is another favorite food of mine from Oaxaca specifically. This is a special type of cheese, and it kind of looks like it comes in almost a ropey texture, kind of wrapped up, subtle creaminess and saltiness that I absolutely love. And you can put that on everything. Yeah, what's not to love? Mezcal is another one. This is obviously a drink. But most people associate Mexico with tequila, but actually tequila is a type of mezcal. This also originates in the area of Oaxaca. So this was pre-colonial times that this distillation process was developed. And I actually got to visit a mezcal farm. What is the word for that? A place where they make mezcal. They burn the agave, so you get this really smoky taste. I really, really love the smokiness. Torta, which is a special type of sandwich, and it is the perfect like afternoon snack where you are really hungry and you just want something fast that's gonna fill you up. I love it. That's my whole spiel on food. Obviously, there's a diversity. So when I was in Mexico City, they are more focused on tacos. They prepare things differently. So I won't be able to cover everything in this small segment, but I just want to shout out Mexican food. Let's move on to the next category. This brings me to my next point, which is the vast diversity of the country. And I'm talking about this in terms of what I said again, that we sometimes associate Mexico or a country as one monolith, but the regional differences are crazy. I'm talking in terms of landscape, in terms of culture, in terms of how people dress, in terms of how people talk, other types of languages that are in different regions. It's really incredible. You can even see the different vibe in the different places. So for example, where I was in Oaxaca, that was more of a mountainous region and quite warm in temperature, maybe about 25 to 30 degrees every single day. And then when I moved to San Cristobal, that was quite different in terms of seeing the people and their traditions as well. And also the food was different. And that was also a mountainous region, but much more cold. So at that time it was, yeah, I would say maybe 15 to 17 degrees. So at least a 10-degree temperature drop. And this really makes sense if you look at how large Mexico is as a country. It's absolutely massive. And they have how many states? Someone didn't do her research. 31 states. They have 31 states in Mexico. Then again, I would say the last month, whereas in Mexico City, culture of the people and how they interact was so different. Obviously, it's a big city, so people are very go, 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 very rushed. Yeah, I think just from me observing the changes from each place to place, I definitely can't say the same for Canada. I would say, well, I guess we do. There are differences when you move from place to place in Canada, but I would say it's definitely more pronounced in Mexico because of their much longer history and also their connection to their indigenous roots. You see a lot of different languages. Oaxaca alone has, I think, 16 different languages in the state, so it's very cool to see that come together. I was able to be there for the tail end of Guelaguetza, which is a huge celebration in July, celebrating the coming together of all the different cultures in Oaxaca, and you get to see all the different traditional dances and dresses, and it's a really nice thing to observe. I really enjoyed the diversity in Mexico. Okay, the next point I'm gonna bring up is the sense of community and interactions with other people. This was, I would say, a big cultural element that was very different from the places I've lived in, so Canada and Germany, and really took me a bit to get used to. One of the first things that I noticed is the interactions even between strangers. It's very common that, especially in a smaller town, people greet each other all the time, even if they don't know each other. They say buen dia, they say buenas noches, whatever. Always have this sort of greeting and interaction and this kind of level of exchange, this level of, okay, we are in the same space, so we're gonna acknowledge each other and greet each other. which coming from Canada and Germany is quite weird because although in Canada, some places this is more common, I would say. In Germany, you would rarely greet anyone you didn't know. I can't really think of a single time I did unless you had some connection to the person. And the other thing is this idea, which sort of connects to food, but you will even wish strangers buen provecho, which means something like bon appetit for my German viewers, guten appetit, basically wishing them to have a good meal. And you would even say this to random people in restaurants. You would walk by and say provecho, provecho. And I really like that interaction actually. It's just this sense of that we are all here, or that I want you to appreciate your food. So yeah, I would say this sense of community even with strangers is very strong in Mexico. Even with people who are neighbors, people who are in the same community, maybe street vendors, they all know each other, they talk to each other, they communicate, they rely on each other. There's definitely a stronger collective sense compared to past countries I've been in. There's more of a sense of closeness. You can observe that family is very important to Mexican society. Not only have many Mexican people told me that family is one of the most important things in their life. They really emphasize the love of their family, not just the immediate family, but also the extended families. It just seems much more family oriented than places like Germany or Canada, where family is important, but I would say not up to the same degree of importance that Mexico has put on it. Just also the sense of closeness. You often greet one another with a kiss on the cheek. That was hard to get used to because I'm used to a handshake as a greeting and maybe at most a hug if you know somebody. But yeah, there's a closer degree of even physical contact, I would say, and how Mexicans interact. This brings me to my next point, which is closely related, and this is the culture around love and romance. Yeah, this emphasis on love and sex and romance and relationships is very prevalent in Mexican culture. You can see that in their music industry. You can definitely see it in TV shows and movies, where sometimes I was surprised by how sexual they were, or how, I guess, the culture around how love is so important and everything, which I think again kind of ties back to their more collectivist nature, whereas Canada, Germany is more individualistic, I would say, and we do view romance as important, but not I'm filming my YouTube video.
Ah, really?
Yeah. It was pretty funny because my boyfriend just came home at the exact same time I was talking about love and romance. Yeah, I would say even the warmth that they show to their partners and kind of just is a lot more close. But yeah, definitely in pop culture and also with looking at people's personal relationships, they're very, I don't even know if there's a word for this in English, but cariñoso, very dear to each other. And yeah, I think the importance of love and relationships is very highly emphasized, and I love how passionate Mexicans are, and I think that's something probably common across all of Latin America. But definitely comparing with the dating culture from Germany, from Canada, you can definitely see some differences there, where I think Germany and Canada, it's more about being logical and seeing if this person is a match for you and taking your time to get to know one another, you know, going step by step, whereas I think Mexicans fall in love a lot faster. They are really passionate and want to show their love very soon, and I really like that a lot actually. But yeah, next thing I'll talk about, which sort of piggybacks off an earlier point, which is the proximity to others and lack of personal space. You will see this a lot, especially if you're visiting crowded public areas, or if you take a colectivo, which is like a small, sometimes it's like a taxi, or sometimes it's a small bus where you are sharing with other passengers and people are really crammed. You will be literally touching side by side, no personal space. And I mean, this kind of makes sense more logistically. Mexico's more densely populated, but also I think it's just a pragmatic sense. You don't always have the opportunity to protect your personal space. I think this is also something compared to Canada and Germany that I notice. I think it's something to get used to. It becomes more normal. If you're taking public transit, you have to deal with it. Or if you're going to a crowded market, you have to deal with it. But I think it's really cool to see how people who live in a place actually get around and how they actually deal with public transportation. This is also a related point, and that comes down to traffic and infrastructure, which are obviously very different different than Canada and Europe. Okay, first let's talk about the traffic. You do not have the right of way as a pedestrian. This was somewhat of a shock to me when crossing the road. You need to be very careful and you need to wait for the cars to pass. Otherwise, they will just keep going. People are speeding or doing weird shit in traffic. Like, you will see a whole family riding on a motorcycle without any helmet. One time we were in Mexico City and we saw this guy going down the wrong way on a road, just past like literally 6 police officers. So yeah, the traffic laws are seen more of a suggestion there and they're not really enforced. Like, you need to be really careful as a pedestrian. Then there's also the infrastructure, which is kind of tied to that. But let's say you're walking down the sidewalk. In Canada, pretty flat. You could even go down it with a wheelchair. In Germany, maybe a bit rocky, but still decent. And then somehow in Mexico, you will have holes in the sidewalk, you will have cracks, you will have randomly a big high step and then step down, maybe a pole in the middle of the sidewalk. It's very haphazardly built. Yeah, in the beginning, took a while to get used to because you need to be careful watching where you step. But then, yeah, now I'm used to it and it actually forces me to pay attention where I'm going and what I'm doing. And it's just part of the experience here. It's kind of funny after a while. You learn to laugh at some things. Okay, my next one is related to hostels, which I find have a very different vibe. For context, I've mostly stayed in hostels in Europe. I've only stayed in one hostel in Canada, to be honest, because most of my traveling life has been in Europe. I find the hostels in Mexico have more of a kind of shabby chic vibe, I would say. A bit more personal touches, maybe not so polished and corporate like you might expect some hostels in Europe. They're also a bit bigger and they usually have more of a community element, either some open space or some events going on or some area where you can meet other people. I actually like that quite a lot. I stayed in a couple hostels here and lived pretty long term in a few as well. And I think sometimes I had the feeling when traveling to hostels in Europe that everybody's just there with either their group of friends or they have their travel itinerary and they're just gonna go do that, boom, boom, boom. And you don't really have the chance as much to relax and take up space and just chat. But it makes sense because real estate is much more expensive in Europe, so you have more smaller space. They tend to cut out common areas. But yeah, I would say traveling in hostels has a different vibe in Mexico for sure. Okay, next up, I want to talk about a very hot button issue, which is probably going to come up a lot if you are considering traveling to Mexico, and that is safety. So I'm going to give my personal opinion on this and what my impressions of safety were in Mexico, because I think this needs to be said. I want to specifically call out Canadians because I feel like there's a lot of fear mongering when it comes to safety in Mexico for Canadians. And I'm talking about the stories you hear on the news about drug cartels, about tourists getting kidnapped. Mostly the news you hear about Mexico in Canada is negative. And maybe that's the reason why when I was in Mexico, my entire 6 months there, I met countless Americans, I met countless Europeans, countless Australians, New Zealanders, and of course other people from South America. But I really think I met less than 10 Canadians. And it's a shame because I think also when I told some of my family that I was traveling Mexico, first of all, Canadians view traveling in Mexico stereotypically as just going to a resort in Cancun, staying to your resort property, going to the beach, drinking margaritas, having an all-you-can-eat or all-you-can-drink experience, going in the ocean, and then flying home. And look, if you want to do that, well, I don't know if there's nothing wrong with that, but at least that's your money and you can spend how you want to and you can travel how you want to. I'm not going to tell anybody how they should be traveling. But I do want to say that Mexico has such a wealth of culture, of experience, of opportunities, of nature, of really, it's so rich in travel opportunities beyond just staying in a resort because of safety fears. And when I first came to Mexico, I came as a solo female traveler. But in the end, my experience boils down to this. If you use common sense, if you stick to safe areas, if you are aware of your valuables and store them in a safe place, if you don't go out at night, your chances to have any experience with crime are greatly reduced. If you want me to make a video about tips about safety, I can definitely do that because I did a lot of research before I went to Mexico. So of course, always make an informed decision for yourself. If these are things you don't want to keep in mind, then maybe Mexico is not the place for you. But I think from what I saw, most crime was very petty crime and crime of convenience. You need to have a different level of caution, of course, when you're in South America. And I think if you just follow some very simple tips and practices, you will have absolutely no problem 99% of the time. I didn't get my phone stolen yet. I didn't get any money stolen yet. I didn't get harassed by the police at all, and generally had no issues with safety at all. But I was extra cautious, and I did feel that extra sense of caution with me while I was traveling throughout Mexico. I want to move on to something a little bit more lighthearted, which is the arts and culture in Mexico. And I'm also going to specifically reference Oaxaca here because I think they have such a strong, amazing arts and culture aspect to it. For example, if you love street art, Oaxaca is amazing. There are entire districts where you can see such bright, vivid, beautiful street art that also has close ties to their culture. I did a street art walking tour, which I like to do sometimes when I'm traveling, and the guide was explaining some of the symbolism and imagery that was used. You'll see a lot of elements that tie back to Day of the Dead and the culture around that in the street art, and also in the art in general, which I think is really cool and definitely very unique style. And I also got to visit an art museum in Mexico, and it was also very interesting to see how the art tied into politics and the history and the culture of Mexico. So that duality and that also representation in art, where art is also being used as a form of protest or a form of spreading a message, I really enjoyed that. I really loved that. And also just the artisan opportunities in Oaxaca. I was wishing I had an apartment and a big suitcase that I could just fill full of art and handicrafts and everything. I will show you a couple small things. This is called an alebrije. It's a little hand-painted animal. And this, I forgot the name, I have to ask my boyfriend. But this is also hand-carved, just a little one. They usually serve tejate in a big version of these, but this is just a little one because I'm traveling. I can't have too many souvenirs. And lastly, I bought a fan as well in Oaxaca, which is hand-painted. So this is the type of stuff, even I know a lot of people ended up getting tattoos in Oaxaca because just the artists and the culture around art is so incredibly deeply embedded there. And you can walk down the street and see a lot of vendors selling their handicrafts, not just textiles. You have every type of thing you can think of that's handmade, and it's just incredible, so beautifully detailed, so beautifully done. I would definitely recommend going there and buying some pieces that you enjoy. I definitely wish I could, but I'm traveling with a backpack, so I was a bit limited. I'm just gonna run through a couple quick ones. I'm not gonna explain all of them, but just a couple rapid fire. First of all, how warm-hearted and open Mexican people are. Mexicans would talk to us, and even though we're foreigners, they made jokes with us and asked us where we're from. At the bars, just approach us and make conversation and show interest, and just that friendliness and that warm-heartedness of Mexicans I really appreciate and I love. The next one would be also fiestas. Mexicans know how to party. This is a fact. They have so many amazing parties. In Oaxaca, they have also a thing called calendas, which is also like mini parades. They dance and they give out mezcal and they're dressed up and they go down the street, and this can even be something for like graduation, for weddings, but also I think in other parts of Mexico, like for example, in San Cristobal, we saw also some parades and some people celebrating for Saints Days. So Mexicans definitely know how to party. And by the way, this is what a real piñata looks like, and not like the ones we get in Canada, which are like random shapes, and they are very fun to break open. Lastly, I would say the nature is incredible. Definitely very different for me in terms of the flora and fauna, but so beautiful. I was able to go on a hike to one of the mountains in Oaxaca, and I really enjoyed seeing the views and seeing the different type of nature that Oaxaca had to offer. And lastly, street cats and street dogs, which are so different for me to see because that just doesn't exist in Canada or Germany, but they are quite lovely most of the time, and they kind of bring a certain spirit to the neighborhood. Generally, they're taken care of by the neighbors and people who live and work around there with just like some food scraps and some water water or whatever the case may be, and I enjoy being able to see the street dogs and street cats. So that brings us to the end of this video. Thanks for sticking with me. I have wanted to come back to my YouTube channel for a long time, but I did really enjoy having the break. Like I said, I will probably do a live update video if that interests you later on, and I would love to hear down below in the comments, what are your impressions of Mexico? Have you traveled there? What have been some of your favorite things? What has stood out to you? Anything, I would love to hear it. If you're Mexican, I love your country, please feel free to comment. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.